So thank you so much for coming in for our former grantee panel for the II Individual Fellowship. We have, as you know, 4 panelists who are going to talk about their projects that they've had. My name's Heather Johnson. I am a Fellowships and Fulbright Program Advisor here at the International Institute. My colleague Kelly Peckins at the back is also Fellowships and Fulbright Advisor. So between the two of us, we coordinate and manage this particular fellowship program. So our panelists, just brief introduction. We have John Monnet. Am I pronouncing your name right, John? Okay. And he's going to be our first speaker. He conducted research. He's actually received the II Individual Fellowship twice. The first time he went to Vietnam. And he's an architecture master's student. He conducted research on damming of the Mekong River. And most recently, the subsequent year, went to Australia. And this was also around rivers and damming and drought control. So most of his work has centered around that. I believe he's planning to kind of contrast a little bit about the process that occurred for each of these years. So,
all right, so I'm John. I'm a master's student in the architecture school in my final year. I guess I'll just talk a little bit about my interests and then about the two projects that I worked on. So I came from looking at water issues and working on houses in New Orleans for a while, and then I lived in Cambodia for 6 months and worked in an architecture firm, and so that kind of spurred my interest in water systems in developing countries, and we'll get into that later. Also, if you have any questions or anything, just like holler or raise your hand or say like, because I'm not exactly sure what you guys are looking for particularly, so if there's anything you want to know, just like get in there. I also, I'm in a certificate program at the School of Natural Resources looking at industrial ecology and kind of like larger systems and flows. And then the architecture school, we do buildings, but lots of other things at the same time. So I'll just go through. So a lot of my interest starts from changing large climatic changes that are happening. So this is California last year and the year before, taken on the same day. I'm sure this is a photo that a lot of you have seen. But this is happening all over the place. With a lot of different consequences. So the first time I went to the Mekong, this is to set up also to contrast the two of them. The first time I went like completely by myself, and I knew people in Cambodia, but really I was not prepared for what I was going to produce, but that ended up great. And then the second time, I spent a lot more time collaborating with a city north of Adelaide and a university there that's working on the region on water issues, and then through Michigan. So the first one, this is the Mekong. It goes from the Tibetan Plateau down to the Delta in Vietnam. So the thought was that it's currently being dammed pretty seriously. So I was looking at the effect on urban populations and people who live around the river and what their perceived kind of changes if people are getting employed or what is going on. So the thought was to do just a transect, so follow the river from the start to the finish in 3 weeks, which is a little ambitious if any of you have been to Southeast Asia to travel. It's tricky. So this is kind of the stuff I thought I would see, that I knew I was going to see. So this is a fishing system in Laos where they capture fish through these kind of like stick nets. Fish just get caught up in them, and it's a traditional fishing technique that's been used for thousands of years. But they're about to build a dam right next to it, and it's going to completely change the livelihood of this incredibly productive fishery system. And then there's other things like trying to get to dam sites, and a lot of them are closed off by the military, and so you can try to get as close as you can, but they're just kind of building a little thing in there. You get shooed away by the police and so on. And a lot of this was because I hadn't set up prior contacts through the government to be able to get directly to sites. But I was moving pretty quickly, one place a day. So, and then this is up on the plateau. This is kind of the last dam. It's all in the same mainstream of the Mekong. So I guess what I produced out of that, what I kind of proposed to produce, and what I did a lot of research on before was like the larger scale mapping of what's going on. So all of the dam systems in the region, the ones that are being proposed on the mainstream, and then population shifts in the region. And also just sea level rise. So it's trying to combine, overlap all of these things to get an understanding of what the effect of damming the mainstream of the Mekong was. And then, so these are just graphics that it was producing by the end, on like where the dams are, who owns them, what the elevation changes, and the effect on the fishery system was the main interest by the end. And so I guess the thing that you like don't expect is who you're going to meet. And I think that this was the incredibly valuable part about this that I wasn't expecting, because I'd picked sites and places, but I spent a lot of time interviewing people. And I would encourage people to really open themselves when they're traveling or even in the process of writing their grant to build in that communication aspect. I think it's like just the most important thing. And so these are folks that I met who were living and working on the river and had just amazing things to say about what was going on in the region. So that was the first one. That was 3 weeks in Cambodia, Laos, and China. And then this was a month and a half in this region of Australia. It's in South Australia. It goes from a relatively Mediterranean climate in the south to like one of the driest deserts in the world in the north. And so I was looking at kind of urban water issues. They've gone through 20 or 30 years of drought there. And so I had set this up with the university there. I contacted someone in a water center that they work on these issues year-round, and they were willing to take me in. And so what I did, instead of having a really strong proposal of what specifically I was going to do, I had sort of an idea. I opened myself up to whatever skills I could offer. So we ended up working on a water reuse project with the city that involves this Burundian community who wants to farm land, and they want to use recycled wastewater to pump through this new farmland system, which is totally unexpected. I would never have known that was going to be the thing that I was working on. But and in giving yourself up with the skills that you have, like you have a lot of skills. I think you'll see if you go abroad, you can really create wonderful things with other people if you make that connection. So this, I mean, it was doing some just basic architectural stuff of helping them make a vision for this place, for the farm. And then I was working with the university on, they have a lot of people who come to their campus to look at all of these kind of hybrid water systems that they've implemented on their campus. But there's no easy way to see it, so we just created a little document of a trail so people could come from surrounding cities and check it out. And they have other delegations from other countries who come and look at what they do to try to mitigate drought issues for the future. And so I guess the other thing I'm interested in is visual communication, just being in architecture. So I spent some time up this is a salt lake. It's kind of hard to tell what it is because it's like there's nothing there. And I was also just looking at what is there, like what's the landscape, what can you listen to or see and bring back. So these are just images from that region, and then kangaroos and all sorts of fun things. But yeah, I guess those are the two projects. I mean, really, if you guys have questions about them, I found out a lot about myself by doing it, and I would highly recommend people to write in a certain level of uncertainty about what you might have skills and you might know how to get there, but to write in something about you might find something else out about yourself is what I'm saying, I guess. And that'll happen anyways, but and the other thing is that the University of Michigan network is pretty insane. It's a huge school, and they have connections with people almost everywhere in the world. And so through someone, a professor, or something else we've collaborated with, you can get in contact directly with people in these other places in the world. And that's a huge network to tap into before you go. I think that's kind of an obvious thing to say, but it's really amazing how big the network is. And then the last thing is just encourage people to think about what they're going to leave and take, like what do you leave someone with something who's there, who they can use it for something, or is it purely about your own research? Or yeah, and I guess that's all I have to say. You guys have any questions about anything, or grant questions?
Yeah. Hello. Just invite questions for John now, because I know that you have to leave soon. So, does anybody have any questions specific to John? Okay. Yeah. Okay. You might,
No,
I
you
don't
can
know.
just-
You can have
Just
it
yell.
about it.
It's all good.
Yeah. Sorry, I missed the beginning of your presentation. Can you just go over the timeline of how you came up with what you were going to do and, when you started contacting people?
hmm Well, the first project, because I'd lived in Cambodia, I knew some people in Phnom Penh, so I started contacting them just to see if I could. That was like a little base to start out with, and then the rest of it, I guess I started probably a little bit before. Well, now, probably about now, because I kind of had an idea, but I didn't. Most of the research was just mapping based and things that I could do around school before I went. And so there wasn't a whole lot. I did a lot while I was actually there, like just every day talking with people and going to try to find sites and meeting with officials and so on and so on. But yeah, I probably started around now. And then I went in the summer, July to August for about a month. And then the other one, I started a little bit before because of the contacts through the university. But people were super responsive and they were excited to take on someone from abroad. But get going on the connections because it takes a while to get things sort of lined up.
Great, thanks. Anybody else?
I guess I'll ask
Okay,
like
yeah.
this.
Go ahead, that's fine.
I think I'm trying, thank you for a very interesting presentation. My name is Talia, and I'm trying to understand if this fellowship would be good for me. And I like the first part of the first summer that you had. I think this is what I'm looking for. So I'm interested in more, I'm a first year PhD student, I'm interested in more in exploratory research. And what I was confused is you have to have specific institution and affiliation and specific amount of hours. I think what I'm interested to do is similar to what John did is I do have some people and I want to interview them about a specific topic. But I was wondering if this could be an option or do I have to have a specific university or some hosting organization rather
Like-
than traveling through cities and contacting people that we know and trying to do like,
Well, I mean, I think that, well, to answer your question, when you set up your contacts, were you affiliated with a specific university, or how did you set that up?
The first time, no, and the second time, yes. So
Okay.
I was affiliated with, people here, and then there wasn't anyone there. It was really
Okay.
just like going, and there's organizations like the Mekong River Commission that I was working with, but they in the end provided like no contact essentially. Like you get there and you're like, let's meet, and they're like,
You're on
no,
your own.
yeah, you're on your own.
Okay.
So it ended up being much more of an exploratory thing, like what do you see, what do you value every day, and how that changes over the course of this thing.
So
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be a hard structure.
It's not, yeah.
I mean, I think that, Kelly can probably speak to it a little bit more, but, if you can make connections with an institution abroad, it might provide more support for what you're doing. You might be more successful in what you're trying to accomplish. I think that that's the ideal, is to make some connections with an institution abroad of some, for whether it's a university or some other organization. But there is some flexibility to how you structure it.
John, having done it both ways, what would you recommend for someone who was more productive for you?
That's really tricky because it did go pretty differently. I mean, at the same time as when I was in Australia, I was living there. You're like living with roommates. It's like every day outside of work, you're doing all sorts of other things. But I really like just traveling every day and meeting new people. And so I'd say the first one is a little more like exciting for me. But the types of things that I felt like I left were stronger in Australia. I think that was kind of, yeah.
Okay. Does that catch? Oh, for competitive reasons, right. Kelly mentioned that to be more competitive, the more structured it is, the stronger the connections you've made. It'll increase your competitiveness within this fellowship competition, which is highly competitive. Any other? Oh, yeah. I know it's kind of awkward, but yeah, if you want, it just
I can
captures
project,
it.
actually.
We're recording, so yeah.
Are you recording?
Yeah.
That's why
so
I got you.
thanks.
All right. So I'm curious with your first project. There's that Bailey Fellowship for like studies in Southeast Asia.
Mm-hmm.
That I think the deadline just passed a week ago or something.
Right.
Did you look into that at all, or?
I think I did look into it. The architecture school is not in Rackham, and we don't have access to a lot of things. So this is one of the few ones we did have access to, which is great. So if you're in the architecture school, I know one of you is, this is a good one to go for. But I think I looked into it, and there was something about the way that it worked out that like didn't seem like it would fit for me. But
So then I guess second part of the question
Okay.
were these projects entirely funded by the II fellowship?
Yeah.
Or I saw in the application you can combine this funding or seek funding elsewhere?
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
if
yeah.
you have any
So-
advice for doing that?
Well, the first time, Southeast Asia is super cheap. I was traveling a lot, but I knew that I could get by on very small amount of money a day. So I knew I could do it with, I don't know, I can't remember. I didn't get the full 5,000, but it was close enough that I could spend a month traveling there. And then the second time, I asked the institution, that the university I was working at, the Water Center, if they had any outside funding. And sometimes they do, but they said that they didn't for this specific project. So they're like, well, you just have to provide your own thing. We'll give you an office space, connections, all sorts of stuff. So it may not be like money through other people, but it was super helpful for having a space and a place. But it never hurts to ask, if you can get more.
Our next presenter is Maggie. Maggie, is it Grundler or Grundler? Grundler, okay. Maggie Grundler. And she spent time in Japan, actually in Okinawa, doing research on a symbiotic relationship that exists on a coral reef between fish and an isopod, a particular thing. So I think that it was probably kind of an interesting project, certainly, but there were a number of things that you have to be managed for conducting research like that, where you're kind of going off in a way. So hopefully we'll get some information on that.
I'm Maggie, and I did my project in Okinawa, Japan. As Heather said, I was working on a symbiosis between a coral reef fish and an isopod that infects it in the mouth of the fish. First, I'll give you a little bit of advice on the application process and sort of what I did. The first thing I'm going to lead off with is that for this particular project, I didn't have to make a direct in-country contact because I had a connection through the university with a professor here who already works in Okinawa. But it was sort of a similar process to go through in that I contacted a professor that I had in oceanography at the university and asked if he knew anybody that was doing some ocean work and could use some help. And I met with the professor and we did an interview and we discussed project ideas. And it's kind of the same thing you would go through if you were emailing somebody abroad. So the first thing that I would advise is to exploit any connections you might have through the university. But if you don't happen to have any connections through Michigan or wherever else you work or study, my next piece of advice is not to be shy and to send out emails anyway, to think about where you want to go and what you want to do, and find institutions or organizations in that place that have people working on something that you could help out with. And I've had to do this for other applications too. And so if you just send an email with a brief introduction, why you're interested in their work, a background knowledge about what they're doing and how it could mutually benefit both of you, it seems intimidating and daunting, but I think you'll be surprised by how successful you can actually be. As long as you come off passionate and respectful, I think you'll surprise yourself with the connections that you can make. My next advice for preparing your proposal, you can get a lot of it on the II website in terms of making sure you have a good sense of your project and your timeline, budget, methodology, all of that stuff you can think about and discuss with your in-country contact. Don't worry if it doesn't pan out, if you do end up getting the fellowship. As we heard earlier, a lot of this stuff can change, and for me, when I was there, I had a sense of what I wanted to look for, and I had some goals for what I wanted to discover about the relationship, but the specific methodology changed, and the timeline changed a little bit, and that's okay. That's part of the process, and it helps you really, in the end, develop a stronger project and a stronger sense of what you want to do. The next thing is to be aware of any language skills that you might need. I was fortunate in that I was traveling with people who had a good sense of Japanese, but I did pick up some language skills along the way, and that's another thing to be excited for. and something to even mention in your proposal as part of the project. Maybe you're interested in learning this language, becoming more culturally enriched. That's just another thing to think about. When you're writing your proposal, you want to make sure that it's understandable to all disciplines. You're not using a lot of specific jargon without describing it. I'm sure that's another thing that you can find on the website, and that's just a little piece of advice. And really importantly, don't forget about the broader impacts. It's not just about the goals of your specific project, but maybe the goals of your career trajectory and what you're going to leave behind for the culture of the country, or even your broader field of interest, and how this country and this project is going to help you achieve those goals. Sorry I got cut off at the end, but I think I said it all. So I'll just tell you a little bit about my project. This is the Sissoko Bridge, and that's Sissoko Island off of the coast of Okinawa, and that's where the research station was that I was located. It's Sissoko Station Tropical Biosphere Research Center. It's part of the University of Ryukyus. And this was the view from my room at the station. Pretty luxurious. It looks luxurious. The station wasn't particularly luxurious, but it's all part of it. This is the relationship that I was looking at. This is a bioluminescent cardinal fish, and that is its isopod parasite that hangs out in the mouth of the fish. And there's another shot. Sorry if you're squeamish. I've spent enough time with these guys that I think they're pretty cute, but I'm also weird, so there you go. I'm still researching this, and I don't have all of my results yet. From what I have looked like, it seems like it's not a very harmful relationship, but it's really interesting. And like I said before, my methodology and my timeline for everything got changed around during the project, but I really came away with a sense of, not only a good sense of the relationship that I was studying, but also a sense that I really had, even through all of the challenges, an amazing time designing this project and going through with it. And if you do have the opportunity to participate in something like this, I think you'll walk away with a really strong sense of what you can accomplish as a person in your career, in your life. And for me, it really convinced me that this is the stuff that I want to do. And so this is what kind of a typical day of collection looked like. We would go out and collect the sea urchins that the fish associates with, and we would take them back to the wet lab at the station on Sissoko Island, and I would pick through buckets of fish and look for isopods in their mouth, which sounds simple, but is actually quite a bit of a challenge. They don't like to cooperate. And I've already mentioned, the cultural enrichment that you can gain from an experience like this, but I'll just go over some of the stuff that I got to participate in. I stayed at the research station for a month, so I got to know some of the other people there, and we got to participate in some of the events elsewhere in Okinawa after we were done collecting on different parts of the greater island. So this is a dragon boat race we participated in Hinoko, Okinawa. We lost miserably, but it was a lot of fun. We would go out to eat different places on Sissoko Island or in greater Okinawa, or we would just cook dinner at home at the station, and you can see all of the different people that I got to learn from and meet. There are people at the research station from all over the world, and I'm sure wherever you go you'll encounter a similar thing. And that, along with the enrichment I got from the research project, this was a huge part of the whole experience, was getting experience stepping outside of the country and meeting people who had done the same from all over the world, and learning more about what they know and how they live was really fascinating. And that is arigato gozaimasu. It's thank you very much in Japanese.
Thank you, Maggie. Does anybody have any questions for Maggie? I think for the last two presenters, we'll leave them for the end, but again, Maggie also has to leave, so if you have any questions for her.
Sure.
This isn't about the application process, but I was just wondering if you could just briefly say what how are the two organisms different?
Sure. So it's a parasitic relationship, at least at the surface. That's what it seems like. There are a lot of other instances of isopod parasites in marine and freshwater fishes all over the world, and there are different natures of the parasitism, where they hang out on the fish, the kind of damage they do to the fish. This one is in the buccal cavity, and a lot of buccal cavity isopod parasites will consume the fish's tongue, but this one just sort of hangs out on top of it. And since I was only there for a month, I wasn't able to do as much in-depth research as I would have liked, so I couldn't, do some like histological examinations on tissue to see if there's secondary infection from bacteria or anything, but on the surface it seems to not be harming the fish very much, which is actually really interesting.
Okay, thank you, Maggie.
Thank you.
So our next presenter is Patrick Laum. Patrick is in chemical engineering and conducted research in Germany over this past summer. So hear a bit about his project.
All right, so hello everyone. I'm Patrick Laun. I'm a junior in chemical engineering. I'm just here to talk a little bit about sort of my experience with applying for the fellowship and a little bit about living abroad. I'll give you a sample of what the project was that I detailed so you can get an idea of maybe what you're looking for, something along those lines. So for choosing a project, I was very interested in doing something very similar to what I've been doing in lab. I've been in the Lahan lab for going on 2.5 years now, and so I do a lot of work with drug delivery and making different particles to sort of suit different diagnostic or treatment needs. And so I was very interested in sort of continuing this work, and I found out that my PI actually worked with a lab over in Germany that did very similar work. So that was how I actually got my connection. But I'd encourage anyone to, look through your sort of faculty homepage for your department, look and see what type of research people are doing to try and maybe connect that way, find your interests. And also the university, as others have said before, is very great for sort of giving you that ability to connect internationally with a bunch of other institutes and programs to sort of suit your needs, suit your interests. So don't be afraid to shop around, look for different locations, different projects, to find something that's sort of in your field. So this was the project that I actually submitted my proposal over, and it was this sort of dual delivery system where I was making these particles that have two sides to them. One side was very quick release, and it used sort of, for lack of a better term, a prescription grade sort of, antacid, there we go, antacid to neutralize the acid in your stomach to try and prevent this ulcer growth that's been associated with several different types of cancers. And in addition, we were trying to treat the underlying bacteria that can cause these ulcers and these cancer, and we had a long-lasting antibiotic that would actually release and sort of degrade over time. And we were trying to get these particles to sort of stay inside the stomach for a long period of time, because one of the problems with sort of your conventional pill is that it'll empty out of your stomach very quickly, and it creates a bunch of systemic effects that we're not really looking for. And so I was very interested in looking at sort of how we make these particles, how they release differently, and how we can sort of customize the structures of them. And so that's the work that I did. And sort of my tips for application is start early, start as soon as possible. Yeah, this is a poster that I found in the lab that I thought was very funny. It was outside of one of our ellipsometry testing areas. And so start very early, get started on the application as much as possible. Just do a little bit each day, because obviously the longer you have to work, the better the finished product will be. And for the budget part of the application, be very realistic, but actually even a little generous about it, because there's nothing worse than going abroad, realizing that the standard of living is higher than you thought it was, and realizing, oh, I only have enough money to buy a meal a day. So be very, very generous. Make sure you have enough money to support yourself over there. Get documentation in order. This was actually a funny one where I was sort of in this gray line of I wasn't certain if I needed a student visa or not, and there was a lot of back and forth. And at one point, very close to when I was about to leave, my passport was actually held by the German consulate, so I had to work a little bit with them and try and figure out. So make sure that you know the legality, that whether you need a student visa, whether you need some sort of documentation aside from just your passport. And I found that it was very useful to not necessarily be fluent in the language, but at least know some common phrases, know a little bit, at least make an attempt, because I found that, people are much more willing to work with you, much nicer if you at least put in a little bit of effort to try and sort of adapt to the culture and the language. And plan out your trip in advance. So, if you have any other places that you want to see, any side trips, try and sort of schedule, figure out when you would want to go, add that into your expenses, and just sort of make sure that you have a very outlined project, realize pretty much step by step what you want to do, because as we've said, the more structured and the more detailed and realistic your project seems, the more competitive your application will be. And so life abroad can be obviously a little bit drastic of a change from living in the US, depending upon where you are. Germany wasn't extremely different from the US, but there were definitely changes, things that you have to adapt to. Just learning about sort of local interesting quirks that you didn't really know before. For instance, the streets in the city were all centered around the center sort of palace, and it took me forever to realize that it was on like a radial spoke system, and I would be walking along and the roads would curve very gradually, and I'd be like, I'm no longer walking east, I'm going north now. Wait, where am I? So find friends. I was really lucky that my lab was awesome. We would hang out after work and, just grab a drink, something like that. But be very open to meeting new people, seeing new things, because, everyone loves to meet people from abroad. I'd get, oh, you're from America, and then next thing I know, I'm sitting there an hour later and we're talking about, our life story, how we're doing, where we're going, stuff like that. Be courteous. I've, heard a lot of stereotypes about, such and such country has such rude people. I never really ran into that problem. I feel, as long as you are a little bit courteous, you'll get that same courtesy back, and that was my experience. And again, talk to everyone you meet, because you can just learn so many interesting and different things about all the people that are there. And I think most importantly, travel, because I stayed in Germany for a decent amount of time, but I was there for about 3 months, so I had the opportunity to, take weekends to actually go travel abroad, and these are some of the images from the various places that I went. Most of these are from within Germany. I think you can see France in the bottom. I think there might be a couple images from Rome. But just go, public transit is so cheap, and the next country is going to be less than an hour away. Just get out there, go to as many different countries, see as many different things as you can, because, well, this project is a lot about, doing the research that you're interested in, getting results. It's also about sort of improving yourself and opening yourself up to new experiences, as well as this research opportunity. And so, as an aside, I really like coffee. So I actually ended up taking pictures of coffee from each of the places that I ended up traveling. So I went, obviously, a lot within Germany. I was stationed in Karlsruhe for the majority of it, but I went to some of the neighboring cities across the state to Berlin, ended up in Italy for a little bit, the UK, and France, and overall it was just an absolutely great program. So I would definitely recommend, apply and travel, go abroad. It was amazing. And I think that's it.
And I think we'll just do questions.
All right.
Okay, and we'll get a chance to ask questions after we've had our last speaker. So our final speaker is Smian Newman. Come on up. He is a sociology PhD pre-candidate and conducted research in Peru and Venezuela. Give us just a moment and I'll get this pulled up.
As Heather Johnson mentioned, I'm in the social sciences, so the project and my sort of tips and so forth are going to be much more tailored to that kind of research than the hard sciences. And also, I've gone sort of light on the sort of personal experience end of things, and in fact not included very much of that, and tried to put together all of the sort of fellowship application tips that I know of, and also just things that I think have worked for me in the past. So I'll start with the the sort of coming up with your research question and application to fellowships. And I think that basically in the social sciences anyhow, and by and large I think in the humanities as well, research questions and sort of proposals that pose these research questions and do so in a compelling way accomplish pretty much like three goals. They find a way of addressing discipline-specific concerns, and this is important because you'll need to have this base covered when you're defending your dissertation and when you're submitting papers to discipline-specific journals, etc. So you should be able to answer the question, or it should be implicit in your proposal, or at least in your research agenda that your proposal is kind of a part of, why your discipline should care. Secondly, successful proposals, I think, find a way of addressing the literature-specific concerns or the sort of case-specific concerns or what have you. So like my own work focuses, I study two countries, Peru and Venezuela, and there's a robust literature associated with each of these countries, and then there's also sort of a more general comparative literature in the region. So you need to make sure that you are not sort of duplicating something that's already been done, and that may be from a number of different disciplines. And then you want to make your research question interesting to fellowship and grant review committees. So why should basically a non-expert care? So why you need to sort of make your case for why your research is ultimately important, and why the funder should make the investment in you to actually give you the money that you're asking for. And then I think most important, for your own sort of success, I think, is that you have to be very interested in your topic. So you have to be committed and willing to spend, in the case of a doctoral degree, a number of years thinking about basically the same thing and putting it on hold while you're teaching and then picking it back up later and still retain interest in the topic. So, and then lastly, and this is sort of the most practical thing, you need to be clear about your intentions based on all of the above when you're going into the field, so what you're actually going to do. So when you go into the field, I recommend having an institutional affiliation just because it was very helpful for me, and it was helpful basically to get suggestions from in-country researchers, and also because the in-country researchers have a lot of contacts that may be important for you in terms of like opening doors, So for me, my research focuses on, it's like political sociology, and I focus on the state and its sort of legalization of squatters who live in the urban periphery of these two cities, of Caracas and Lima, and academics know the state officials who are involved in that kind of activity, right? So if you affiliate in country, then you can sort of open some of those doors, but also keep in mind that this can cut both ways. Some academic affiliations may sort of paint you in the wrong color for certain state entities or private organizations and what have you. So keep that in mind. Before you go, and as you're sort of winding up to sort of launch into the field, you want to definitely contact all of those that you know in the place you're going. Tell them that you'll be coming, roughly what you're going to be doing, and that you'd like to meet with them, and so forth. And if you don't know people there already, then you need to do, emailing, sort of cold emailing or whatever, right? But line as much of that stuff up as you can, and so that you can arrive and sort of hit the ground running, make the most of your time. I think a good thing to have sort of down before you enter the field is also to have several different ways of thinking about your research, depending upon the company you're holding, so depending on the audience. This is not to say don't be disingenuous, but realize that if you frame your work, especially like in the social sciences, if you frame your work to both academics and, for example, state officials in the same way, they're going to react differently to that same kind of expose of your interests. So you need to be sort of ready for that and be able to negotiate that by and by. And then perhaps this is obvious, but a really important thing that is sometimes overlooked is to try and make friends with these people who are going to be important for you by and by. So if you're doing document-based research with archivists and librarians, if you're doing interviews or fieldwork-based data collection, then whatever other kind of gatekeepers are key for you. All right. So you will inevitably find certain roadblocks. So this is one of the key places that I was directed to. This was supposed to be an archive of the main sort of state organization in Peru, Lima, Peru, which is responsible for issuing, for sort of legalizing the residence of urban squatters. It's sort of the process that I was looking at. So I went to the National Archive and looked in their sort of manual and directory of sort of archives in the country, and they gave me this address, and so then I went here, and lo and behold, you know, the place has been shut down for some time. I was never able to actually find the materials that used to be archived in this building, but you know, you have to sort of adjust accordingly and change your focus a little bit. So. Okay, inevitably also you will have people when you sort of have called upon all those who you can possibly call upon to and tell them you're going to be arriving in country and want to meet with them and so forth. They're going to give you a bunch of random leads, and you're going to have to figure out how you're going to follow this up, right? So you have your specific question, which is discipline specific, it's literature specific, and it's also sort of general interest, right? And that's that you've been working on really hard for a long time and putting a lot of effort into, and then you're going to explain that to somebody and they're not really going to understand, and they're going to say, oh, you should meet with these 3 people that to you sound sort of irrelevant, and so you're going to need to sort of negotiate these kinds of things and figure out how to allocate your time. And so I would suggest just the way to do this is, well, let's just skip forward, I guess, to try to figure out who are the key people in your that are relevant for your question of interest. So if you're studying some kind of a sort of official or formal organization, then you can use like an organogram and try to figure out, you know, if there are people whom you can be introduced to that know like key individuals that you need to actually talk to, right? And this may not be as explicit as this, which you can find online, but you should try to think about, you know, who are the key people that you need to figure out ways of having doors opened for you to actually speak with those people to get the information that you need. So, yeah. So that can be helpful. And then I think this is lastly, I think you should probably just be open to pursuing promising but unexpected leads, at least in the sort of social sciences in the developing world. Some very good research has been done using data and documents that researchers didn't know existed before entering the field. And so if you've got, if you know what you're interested in and something appears to you that it might be quite compelling, you should be ready to maybe think about rearranging your schedule a little bit to pursue some kind of a promising lead. Or at least assess whether it would be worthwhile to do so, maybe in a subsequent trip or something like that. You want to then definitely write memos regularly. Most people recommend writing these weekly, like during the weekend, but certainly somehow keep up with what you've accomplished and what you still need to accomplish. And then especially after leaving the field, make sure that you write a really good set of notes about how you can, you know, what you did accomplish and how you can restart your research. Because when you go back and you start teaching again or whatever, you're going to inevitably forget a bunch of these finer details that are crucial for picking up the reins again. And it's really easy when you're sort of leaving the field to do that. I mean, it's kind of a pain, but it's easier then than later. You'll probably make the most swift progress at the very end of your trip, and you'll be sort of sad that you're leaving. But that's actually, I think, a positive thing because it indicates that you have a real viable project, and that next time you go, there's a bunch you can actually do, and you can really sort of accomplish a lot. And remember to keep in touch with important and promising contacts every few months after leaving the field, and if you can, try to do favors for them. So I have one of my contacts, for instance, just came to the United States, or actually he's coming in about a week, at the end of this week, and he was interested in doing like speaking engagements, so I arranged something for him to go to NYU and speak He's a Venezuelan man, and he is going to go and like attend a panel. And so, it's these kinds of things that potentially will win people over to then later helping you out when you go back in the field and call upon them. So those are just sort of my general advice, and so I'll leave it at that.
That's a very helpful advice, for sure. Got it? Oh, there you go.
Okay. So I think we'll turn it over to Q&A at this point, and since we are recording, we'd like to capture the audio, so I'll just pass this around. But are there any questions on any aspect of the presentations or application preparation, making contacts, things like that? Yeah.
Hi, thanks for coming and talking to us about this. I guess my question is more for Patrick, but I was wondering, since your project was so scientific in nature, how did you especially make the case that, going abroad and traveling would be, necessary for the completion of your project?
Oh, you guys don't have mics. Sorry, I didn't realize.
Yeah, so in my case, it was very much the fact that the lab that I was working with over in Germany, they specialize in doing the polymers that I was going to be using to make the encapsulation. So I went over and I was able to gain a little bit of their expertise to sort of work on the actual formulation, since we do a lot more of the delivery side over here. And so that was sort of how I was able to make my case that it was sort of necessary for me to go over there. Anything you want to add?
Well, so I had to do my research abroad because it has to do with themes that are abroad. Yeah.
Does that answer your question? Or okay.
Thanks. Thank you. I just have a very short question. I'm also going to Europe. Is your funding from IIIF sufficient for your stay, or you have other funding options?
Yeah, so I'd have to say definitely pursue several sources of funding, because as we've said, it never hurts to have more. In my case, I was mostly funded through this fellowship. I was given a little bit of money just through the laboratory itself, about enough to pay for my housing, and then this fellowship made up the additional money there. But it never hurts to have, another source of funding helping you out.
Yeah, I would. Well, so it seems that the issue is really like, how many things should I apply to? Because, you may, even if the IIIF is enough for you, that doesn't mean that you'll necessarily get it, right? So I would suggest casting a wide net and, applying for everything that you can, or, within reason. You can't spend all of your time doing that, but and then definitely think hard about that budget, which I think you discussed before, and really what it's going to take, and allow yourself some leeway there, because it's going to be yeah, it's hard to anticipate everything at the beginning, but I would apply to a number of things, and then best case scenario is you could turn something down and just accept the fellowships that are best for you.
So we certainly recommend that you do apply for any source of funding that you would be eligible for the same trip. Like they mentioned, you might be successful in one competition and not in another. But even if you were to be granted multiple sources of funding, we just ask that you disclose it, and that's what's typical for all funding sources, that you disclose it. And then basically we would just make adjustments, or they would make adjustments, and we all just want to make sure you're not getting duplicate funding, surplus funding. But you might be absolutely allowed to keep both awards, which is great to put on your resume, that you were a recipient of both awards, but maybe at a lower rate for each award. So there are a lot of options there.
I have a question related to housing. I think it's very hard to anticipate what's going to happen in the summer. Let's assume the deadline is approaching and I'm trying to find a roommate or whatever. Sometimes, like the research I want to do, I will be traveling. So, in terms of housing, and in terms of budget, should I just assume that I will be living at the hotel, like some kind of dorm, and put that amount? Because, I mean, until the summer, probably if I'm going to travel in July, I can find something more affordable, but until February, I have no clue. And I think I'm not going to spend too much time researching housing because it's trying to make in context. So what would you advise?
I'll just handle this one. So basically, a couple of things. One, we would expect everyone to be planning their budget at a student rate, meaning kind of student housing options. And that goes for food and transportation and that sort of thing. Obviously there are lots of options for these things, and we would expect you to be doing the sort of what's normal for a student. As far as doing the research, we definitely recommend that you make your in-country contacts and that you ask your in-country affiliates about that. And certainly you can talk to your faculty in your department who might do research regularly there. They might take grad students sometimes. They would have a pretty good idea on it, or they could put you in touch with someone who would. You might network with other grad students who've traveled there or undergrads who've traveled there and done some work and ask them, what their budget experiences were. Other recommendations for those?
Well, so you indicated that you will be traveling quite a bit, which would make it more difficult to find some sort of longer-term housing. But insofar as you do stay in one location for some time, I mean, it's totally you can find a room like everywhere you go, right? So it's just a matter of if you want to spend the time to actually look for that, and if it's worthwhile given the amount of time that you'll be in a specific spot. So that's the way that I would approach that. I did both in each country that I was in a hotel for a few days while I was still sort of figuring out. I tried to get the ball rolling on housing, on sort of like in-home housing before I left, but I was in a hotel for a little while up to that.
My question was about going to more than one country because I plan to go to Peru and Germany in the summer, and I think it's mostly to Seaman because you went to Colombia and Peru, so Venezuela, and I just didn't know if that was an advantage or not on the application because that just makes it more complicated, or might make.
Well, I will leave the application question to the resident experts. But in terms of logistics, though, I will tell you that it can be kind of a pain in the butt to do back-to-back trips because, especially if you're, it depends on the nature of your sort of research design too, but it can oftentimes be useful to really sort of make sense of one fieldwork experience unto itself without immediately following it up with another one. I think that it went fine, but in a perfect world, I would have had like a little break between the two. So.
And I'll just say that for the application, there's no preference for the number of locations. It's really just up to the applicant to make a compelling argument for why you would have to go to multiple locations, what will be accomplished in each location, and then you just have to convince the reviewers that it's necessary for your project and that it's worthwhile, especially given if it's, additional cost or if it is a particularly complex, logistical situation. But in general, the application is not evaluated on terms of complexity or logistics. It's about the quality of the application and the feasibility of the research and how it connects to your academic and career goals. So again, if you can make the argument, then you can propose as many locations as necessary.
I have a question similar to one of the previous about putting together your budget proposal and how you research that. And in terms of housing or food costs or transportation, are there kind of reliable resources across the world where you can check that has those kind of like expected numbers? Or do you just kind of have to Google from scratch for each place you're considering?
At least in my case, I was lucky enough that my institute provided me housing, gave me very concrete numbers on what I was expected to be spending, and they gave me sort of ballpark estimates just from their personal experience, what they expected the cost of living would be, food, travel, that sort of thing, and then I sort of just took the numbers that they gave me, added a little bit extra on just to make certain that in case they weren't reliable, in case it was a little bit higher, a little bit lower, that I would be okay. But I assume there are other resources I would say check online, for standards of living, costs like that, see what specifically is there? Like, for instance, the local train system for Germany and the like, I just looked up what the average ticket was, so something like that.
Yeah, I would second that advice. And I mean, this stuff is kind of rough figures, right? I mean, you look at hotel prices where you're going to stay online, right? And then you multiply that by however many days and have that plane tickets, right? Flight tickets. And then like meals is pretty much the other thing in transportation, right? So I think, you just start doing that kind of arithmetic and comes together pretty well. And actually, the IIIF has a really good sort of example budget that's very helpful for you maybe to work with to sort of as a point of departure.
Right, and we would definitely recommend relying on your in-country contact, as you said, to ask about what they recommend, what their averages are, and then maybe you can adjust accordingly. And then, yes, the showing your arithmetic is actually important. So when you're actually preparing your application in your budget, just tell how you're arriving at the figures that you're putting in there. So if it's so much per month times number of months, or so much per week times number of weeks for food, housing, all the different expenses, that's going to be really helpful. All right, well, thank you so much to our presenters and for all of you who came, and let us know if you have any other questions.